The Latin Mass story has gotten a little more complicated. And I'm getting a warning that my new extremely expensive internet connection is unstable. So please forgive any weird connection issues. It's out of my control and nothing can be done about it. But we're going to try to push forward anyway. But the Latin Mass story has gotten more complicated. It's, as you will see, and I want to remind you as we go over this story today, of the concept of a trial balloon and the concept of the Vatican trying to plug leaks. In this case, the trial balloon is this. Politicians will often put an idea out there to see what the people think, to see how they react. And then depending on the reception they get to this concept, to their idea, will depend entirely on how they move forward. Yes, I know folks in the chat, like I just said a minute ago, there's nothing I can do about it. This is my new expensive connection, and there's literally nothing I can do. I'm sorry. But the story's important, so we're going to push forward. The other concept I want you to bear in mind with this story is the concept that the Vatican has been trying to plug leaks. And so they will give information out there and see, let it out in the Vatican, and then see who takes see where it ends up in the discourse out in the news cycle, because that will allow them to find who their leakers are and to take care of the leak. So as we go over these stories, bear all that in mind, because we're going to go, for some context first, back to something I've talked about recently already. I'll go to Catholic culture. This is Phil Lawler's website. And remember when Rorate Caeli broke the news that a new Latin Mass document was coming, Phil Lawler went and verified it with his own different sources in the Vatican. So his headline is "A New Offensive in the War on Traditional Liturgy." Again, this article's from June 20th. I reported on this already. We're going to do a brief touchback on this for context today. So the important part of the article is this, quote, "Rome's rumor mills are buzzing. According to multiple sources, a new Vatican document is being prepared, which would impose still lighter restrictions on the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. If approved in its current form, our informants tell us the document would bar diocesan priests from celebrating the TLM. Only the communities specially formed around the old liturgy, the FSSP, Institute of Christ the King, etc., would be allowed to use the ancient rite. Whether these reports are entirely accurate, here's your important caveat, and whether the proposed document will gain final approval remain to be seen. The rumors suggest a publication date in July, but the official publication date of a Vatican document often does not match the date of its actual appearance. A document formally dated in July may not see the light of day, much less take effect until autumn or beyond. So Catholics who love the traditional liturgy are worried, and likely to remain worried for some time to come. And as if to confirm them in their fears, just as these reports have circulated in Rome, a remarkable interview has appeared with one of the most ferocious opponents of the TLM, underlying the implacable determination of liberal liturgists to eradicate all traces of the traditional liturgy," end quote. Phil Lawler there is referencing Professor Andrea Grillo. Remember that. Just remember that. That's, the guy who basically said he gave statements. He's a liturgist who inspired, at the very least, Traditionis Custodes, who flat out said all masses in the Catholic Church should be the Novus Ordo. He said that. If you are an Eastern Rite Catholic, pay attention to Andrea Grillo. However, I want to remind you of something. I started with that to remind you that, according to Phil Lawler and other sources, the document is already drafted, allegedly, and is allegedly making the rounds. And actually, as I'll tell you in a few moments, if the report I personally received a couple of days ago is true, it's more than making the rounds. But Phil Lawler's point there is the document exists and has existed for some time. And he wants to remind you that the document may not come in July. It may come in September. It may come at Christmas. Who knows? It's ready for whenever. But we'll get to all of that in a moment. First, we go to the first story that complicates all of this. And this comes from LaCroix, but they've got I pay for access to LaCroix, actually, but for whatever reason, I guess I don't pay enough. They don't give me enough. So they reported this first, as you'll see. But we'll go to the free version, which is the katholisch.de, the official website of the German Bishops' Conference, and they give us this headline. Report: no further restrictions of the traditional Latin Mass by the Vatican. Does the Vatican want to further restrict or even ban the traditional Latin Mass? Several traditionalist blogs have spread the rumor that a new document on this is to be published shortly. However, there is now other information. This is the German Bishop's website. You will not get much more Bergoglian than that. Okay. In fact, they are more Bergoglian than Pope Francis in the way that they push harder and they push faster for changes in the church. When they criticize Pope Francis, it's when he says mean things about the James Martin crowd, or that he doesn't go fast enough for their purposes. The Vatican's interventions in the German Synodal Way, I will remind you, were always and exclusively on the issue of you're going too fast, slow down for the rest of the church. Not, hey, what you're doing is heresy, but you're going too fast. These changes should be done with the rest of the church. That is a very different kind of intervention. Okay. Here's their report, which they're taking from LaCroix. Quote, contrary to many rumors, no new document from the Dicastery for Divine Worship on the greater restriction of the traditional Latin Mass is to be published for the time being. Note the caveat, for the time being. According to a report in the French newspaper LaCroix on Monday, the Vatican has decided not to officially deny the rumors that have been circulating on blogs for weeks. It is customary to leave rumors of this kind uncommented so as not to give them any weight, it added. A high-ranking Vatican representative described the rumors about a tightening of restrictions as gossip and completely unfounded. Several sources told the newspaper that the rumors were possibly due to a misinterpretation of Roman decisions on certain communities or institutes. One of these concerns the missionaries of Divine Mercy in southern France. Rome has currently suspended the ordination of 5 seminarians indefinitely. It is being examined whether it will make sense to allow the prospective priests of the traditionalist community to celebrate Mass in the preconciliar form as provided for in the community statutes. Following the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, Pope Francis imposed a restriction on the traditional Latin Mass. Priests who are ordained after its publication and wish to celebrate according to the Missale Romanum of 1962 must submit an application to the diocesan bishop. The latter must consult the Vatican before granting permission. According to a media report, German Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller, I will cover this story in more detail in the coming days, emphasized at a priestly ordination near Chartres at the weekend that the preconciliar liturgy does not meet with the approval of all Vatican representatives. The former prefect of the faith accused high-ranking representatives of the Dicastery for Divine Worship of persecuting old traditions, interesting phrasing, old traditions, such as the preconciliar liturgy, because they saw, quote, a greater danger to the unity of the church in this than in the, quote, reinterpretation of the creed. Among other things, Mueller reported on a conversation with a representative of the Dicastery for Divine Worship to whom he had reported on the faithfulness of young Catholics to the faith at the recent traditionalist pilgrimage. The Vatican representative replied to Mueller that this was, quote, no reason at all to rejoice, as this Holy Mass was celebrated in the old extraordinary Latin rite. Rumors have been circulating in traditionalist circles for several days, several weeks really, that the Vatican wants to further restrict the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. The rumors were intensified after Pope Francis received the prior of the Christ the King Institute, Gilles Vach, in audience last week. The Institute celebrates the liturgy in the preconciliar form. Nothing was initially revealed about the content of the conversation. The Institute later reported that the Pope had asked them to stick to their charism. Relatively short article, but I think it gives you what you need to know. According to, this is now the official line from, we'll call them Bergoglio-friendly organizations. I'd go with LaCroix's report on this, even, but I mean, look, they are reporting this. The bishops are, German bishops are reporting this. They're saying nothing is happening. We will all find out together. Take reports of the coming Latin Mass ban with a grain of salt. You should always do that until the document is here, but take the report seriously. Pray that it does not happen, and pray that if it does happen, that the bishops do the will of God in this manner. Now, to complicate this further, I received a report from a diocese in the U.S. that I will not identify because I have a source in that diocese, and the bishop, who is no friend to tradition, to put it mildly, has already received a copy of the alleged document, and that some bishops in the U.S. already received a copy of the document 2 weeks before it's supposed to be promulgated. To Again, take that with a grain of salt as well, to be sure. But stories like this tend to stick out at this time. So I'm going to show you this. Again, we're talking about complications to this story. So from complicit clergy, we get this. Richmond bishop halts only Latin Mass in Charlottesville while awaiting dispensation from Rome. Bishop, who, there's a Latin Mass there. They were given an extension, like a lot of places were after Traditionis Custodes. The extension has now expired. He is allowing them to offer the traditional Mass, not the traditional Mass. He's offering them the Novus Ordo ad Orientem in Latin in hopes that will placate people while they wait for another extension from Rome, which misses the point entirely. It's not the Latin that we traditionalists care about. It's the fact that it's the Mass that developed organically from apostolic times. That's what we care about. And that it's that versus the new Mass, which was bluntly developed in a committee, often prayers written on napkins, and requiring a handful of Orthodox bishops just before its promulgation to threaten Pope Paul VI with excommunication if he promulgated the version that was promulgated, because it contained serious errors, to the point where they were going to declare Paul VI an anti-pope for promulgating it and replacing the Latin Mass. There are stark differences that go well beyond the Latin. I don't expect him to get an extension for another extension for the traditional Mass. Bishop of Richmond may be waiting for a long time. But a further complication is a piece on that I would call good news, I would say. And it's this. If you're not familiar with this, we have a story here about the what we would call the Agatha Christie indult. If you're not familiar with the Agatha Christie indult, it was the Agatha Christie indult was promulgated, or was given out in the 1960s. So, famed English writer Agatha Christie, mystery novels, that kind of thing. Not even a Catholic, as I understand it. She wrote to Rome to defend the Latin Mass. And what she ended up doing is basically and I could do a video on this later if people want, but the real thing here about all of this is that we have a new version of it. The result of the Agatha Christie indult was that she managed to preserve, through her own efforts, the traditional Mass in a cathedral in the UK for decades, to this day, from the 60s to today. Although that Agatha Christie indult is apparently under threat also, because there are certain figures in England who have a lot of pull in the present Roman Curia, even laymen, and they've been trying to get the Latin Mass extinguished in all of the UK, and they make a hobby out of doing this. But we have a new Agatha Christie indult, and this comes from Damien Thompson, the associate editor of The Spectator and the host of the Holy Smoke podcast, which is a sort of a conservative, traditionally minded, and very, I would say, polite in its presentation, but also very, like, when you listen to what he's saying, it can be very brutal, but presented in a very polite way, in a just uniquely English kind of way. Podcast on the crisis in the church and the crisis in the broader culture. I remember a few months ago listening to a very, very good interview he had done with Cardinal Pell that he published long after Pell passed away. Recommend it if you are so interested. But this there was a new Agatha Christie indult letter presented by we'll go over the signatories first here. I'm going to read those to you before the letter. So some of these you won't know, but Robert Agostinelli, Lord Alton of Liverpool, Lord Bailey of Paddington, Lord Bamford, Lord Berksley of Knighton, Sophie Bevan, Ian Bostridge, Nia Campbell, Megan Cassidy, Sir Nicholas Coleridge, Dame Imogen Cooper, Lord Fellows of West Stafford, Sir Rocco Forte, Lady Antonia Fraser, Martin Fuller, Lady Getty, John Gillooly, Dame Jane Glover, Michael Gove, Susan Hampshire, Lord Hesketh, Tom Holland, Sir Stephen Howe, Tristram Hunt, Stephen Israelis, Bianca Jagger, that'd be Mick Jagger's daughter, Eager Levitt, Lord Lloyd Webber, Julian Lloyd Webber, Dame Felicity Lott, Sir James Macmillan, Princess Michael of Kent, Baroness Monckton of Dallington Forest, Lord Moore of Etchingham, Fraser Nelson, Alex Polizzi, Mishka Rushdie Momin, Sir Andreas Schiff, Lord Skidelsky, Lord Smith of Finsbury, Sir Paul Smith, Rory Stewart, Lord Stirrup, Dame Kirite Kanawa, Dame Mitsoku Uchida, Ryan Wigglesworth, Ann Wilson, Adam Zamoyski. And these are nobles and celebrities in the UK who gave us this letter, the title Latin Mass at Risk. This is addressed to Pope Francis. Again, it worked with Paul VI, remember, a celebrity, asking the Pope at the time, to preserve the Latin Mass for cultural reasons. Here's the 21st century version of this. Sir, on July 6, 1971, the Times printed an appeal to Pope Paul VI in defense of the Latin Mass signed by Catholic and non-Catholic artists and writers, including Agatha Christie, Graham Greene, and Yehudi Menuhin. This became known as the Agatha Christie letter because it was reportedly her name that prompted the Pope to issue an indult or permission for celebration of the Latin Mass in England and Wales. The letter argued that the rite in question in its magnificent Latin text has also inspired priceless achievements by poets, philosophers, musicians, architects, painters, and sculptors in all countries and epochs. Thus, it belongs to universal culture. Recently, there have been worrying reports from Rome that the Latin Mass is to be banished from nearly every Catholic church. This is a painful and confusing prospect, especially for the growing number of young Catholics whose faith has been nurtured by it. The traditional liturgy is a cathedral of text and gesture, developing as those venerable buildings did over many centuries. Not everyone appreciates its value, and that is fine, but to destroy it seems an unnecessary and insensitive act in a world where history can all too easily slip away forgotten. The old rite's ability to encourage silence and contemplation is a treasure, not easily replicated, and, when gone, impossible to reconstruct. This appeal, like its predecessor, is entirely ecumenical and non-political. The signatories include Catholics and non-Catholics, believers and non-believers. We implore the Holy See to reconsider any further restriction of access to this magnificent spiritual and cultural heritage. Damian Thompson notes here, by the way, and then you have a composer has actually says that a famous composer in the UK says the TLM is a jewel that must be treasured. And he deplores petty Philistine authoritarianism of Vatican faction reportedly trying to ban it. It's an accompanying article, not necessarily go over it today, but one of the things that you'll notice here, and Damian Thompson notes this in another link place as well, that none of the signatories of that are political. And I mean political, they are not people who connect to Pope Francis in any public way. A letter like this should not have the signatures of anybody who like myself here, or any of the bishops who have a history of chastising Francis. This has to be somebody, essentially an appeal from a neutral but respectful party, and that's what we have here. All right, let's take a look here at the live chat. Lynch Mob says this is ecumenism that I can support. Yes, that's the kind. True. Also, yes. Yeah, I'm even having problems here on my end, by the way, for those who might be wondering why things are a little rocky. I'm using my super expensive internet connection. This is what I'm getting for it today. But Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber's name included is not surprising. He composed an arrangement of Requiem, and we sing his Pie Jesu. Yeah. Daniel says the problem, if the Vatican is eradicating the Latin Mass of bad faith, and they will just double down by inflicting more dissonance on traditional Catholic franchise. Right. And I want to remind people of something. This is why the reason I started today with the with Phil Waller's article again was because he made a very salient point in all this, that the document exists already, and that's just waiting in the wings to be promulgated. And it could come in July. It could come in September. It could come at Christmas. We don't know. But again, Vatican-friendly news sources now are saying that they have gotten no confirmation whatsoever that this document is coming. And so I remind you here at the end, the same thing that I reminded people of at the beginning of this, which is that in the end, there might be two alternative hypotheses worth considering here instead of a Latin Mass ban coming, and one of the concept of a trial balloon. Politicians float trial balloons. It's an idea, putting an idea out there to see how the public responds, especially on something that might be more controversial. If they respond positively, they might move forward. The other is that the Vatican is very leaky. There are a lot of rumors that come out of the Vatican, stories about appointments and other things that come out of the Vatican that the Vatican does not want out. So they do their very, very best to crush it. And so a good way to plug a leak is to put an idea out, float the trial balloon behind closed doors, and then see how it gets out. And if you do it strategically, you can find who's leaking, and then you can take care of the leak. That could be what's also happening here. Okay. Justla says, most likely it will come on a Marian feast day. That's how they operate. I did a whole video on all the Pachamama-related things I could find that the Vatican has done, including the dates commemorative coins and stamps were issued, any proclamations they made. They all happened on Marian feast days, every single one of them. It's an old video of mine. You can find it on my channel. But the day that Traditionis Custodes was issued was on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. People expect this to happen on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. This year, if it happens this month, it would be on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is 2 weeks from yesterday. So bear that in mind. If there's any further thought in this, just I will remind people that you should pray that, one, this does not happen. 2, take this the reports solved. And 3, and I say most importantly, pray that your bishops have the spine to follow the will of God in this. Which I personally doubt is, that the will of God is for the liturgy that fed the saints for going back to apostolic times in an organic development, for that to be banned. I doubt that's the will of God in this. But for the bishops to do the will of God, even if that means resisting to the point of being canceled. I'm curious what any of you may have to say in the comments. Please, thank you for your patience during my unexpected technical issues today, because I am using, again, my expensive internet access, and I don't know what the problem is, because it's really annoying. Thank you, Anthony, for anything, for the kind words in the super chat. It is appreciated. Any final thoughts in the live chat? If not, we will wrap this up here. I have a interesting news story coming for you about more Vatican shenanigans. So, and if anything else, pray for everybody we talked about today in this video, if they stir up any negative feelings. As always, pray for the church. Anthony Stine, Ave Maria.